is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. Europe braces for the hottest temperatures ever recorded. Health alerts are issued as blistering heat waves scorch the southern parts of the continent. South Korea's president pledges more military supplies and aid to Ukraine during his visit to Kiev. The safe passage of Ukrainian grain is at stake as a deadline to extend the Black Sea deal approaches, with no word yet from Russia. Deepening ties between Beijing and Brussels. China's senior diplomat Wang Yi holds talks with the EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell. Europe is bracing for the hottest temperatures ever recorded. Weather warnings have been issued in several countries as a heat wave continues to sweep across large parts of the continent. Italy, Spain and Greece are among the worst affected, and temperatures are forecast to climb even higher next week. Tourist attractions are taking steps to protect visitors, while the Acropolis in Athens is closing its gates during the hottest part of the day. And that's where we're heading to now, and our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas in the Greek capital. Evangelo, how's it feeling now?
Well, I have to admit it's much better than it was a few hours ago. There's a slight wind that picked up and the temperature has now dropped a few degrees Celsius. But earlier today, sometime between 2 or 3 o'clock local time, the thermometer was showing close to 44 degrees Celsius. And in some areas of the country further away from the sea inland, that temperature was even higher. In some places recorded temperatures up to 46 degrees Celsius. And that's why the government has decided to close some of the iconic sites of the country, exactly like the one behind me, the Parthenon, which was shut between 12 at noon until 5:30 p.m. It was closed yesterday and it was closed today. It's going to remain like that for the next couple of days until the temperatures start dropping. But as I mentioned earlier, the wind has been picking up, and that is not a good sign, because with these high temperatures, low humidity levels, and the winds, it's a perfect combination for wildfires. And we did speak to the fire brigade, and they told us that this is bringing a lot of headaches to them. But we also spoke to meteorologists and told us more about this heat wave, and this is what they had to tell us. The streets of Athens are less busy than usual. The sound of air conditioners has overtaken that of honking and traffic. Even the iconic site of the Parthenon, visited by millions, is forced to shut down for a few hours during the day.
It's really hot. The minute you step out of anything air-conditioned, it's like... So yeah, it is hot.
We've been walking everywhere in other cities, but here we've been catching taxis everywhere to help. And when you go on Google Maps and you put your trip as walking, comes up with like a weather warning saying we don't recommend you to walk.
And that is what the authorities have been saying. Avoid any unnecessary travel. Many people here in the Greek capital have been seeking respite from the scorching weather, heading to air-conditioned centers set up for the vulnerable and cooling down in water fountains, while others head to nearby beaches. And in the center, city workers hand out cold bottles of water. With temperatures in the 40s and this weather expected until next week, Greece's state mechanism has been placed on high alert to deal with the heat wave and wildfires. Scientists say heat waves are becoming longer, more frequent, and more intense as a result of climate change.
Every year we experience a transfer of warm air in the southern part of Europe. We could experience 1, 2, 3, even 4 heat waves through the summer. There might be some slight changes, but we will experience heat waves every year, and they mostly come from North Africa, where climate change has played a role and will continue to play a role is in the number of heat waves we will experience.
It is the first time that the ancient temple of Athena, the Parthenon, is forced to shut down for a few hours. It might be inconvenient, but standing under this sun for many hours could cause problems, and that's what authorities are trying to avoid, especially with tourists. But on the north side of the city for the fire brigade, tourists are their least worry.
So far this year, we don't have any strong winds, but saying that it could change in the coming days. We don't know what might happen, if the winds will pick up or how high the temperature will be. We have 14,000 firefighters on standby, 2,500 reserves, and more than 4,000 volunteers.
While there isn't much wind, it's expected to pick up, putting the country on high alert. But this heat has also put a strain on health services and power grids. And with famous sites shutting down for a few hours, the impact could be felt on tourism. And that's why the government of Greece has put a number of measures, especially for those who are vulnerable, to avoid being out in the sun, especially during the peak hours, which are between 12 and 5 p.m.
And Evangelo, there does not seem to be any respite on the horizon, with more hot weather forecast for next week.
Yes, indeed, and this heat wave now is expected to start decreasing sometime on Wednesday, but now meteorologists are saying that starting Wednesday night, we're going to see another increase of warm weather. This warm mass of air is going to be coming from North Africa as a result of creating another heat wave, and perhaps they're saying it could even reach higher temperatures than what we're seeing right now. So this, now the authorities and the Civil Protection Ministry will be holding a meeting sometime on Monday to discuss how they're going to further move forward with the heat wave that is going to happen next week. Of course, they extended the red alert until the end of next week. Those who have any problems of breathing or low blood pressure are advised to stay indoors. These cooling centers will remain in place, as well as people who work in the public sector are highly advised to stay indoors and work from home. Now, everybody's going to be on standby, from the civil protection, the medical staff, as well as the fire brigade.
OK, Evangelo, get inside into that AC. Thank you very much indeed. That's Evangelo Sipsas reporting from Athens. Well, Carolyn Kroger is a climate researcher at the University of Oxford.
So Southern Europe does have heat warning systems in place, and it is warning the population and relevant authorities such as hospitals. But there's still a couple of things that we can do in Europe to better equip ourselves to deal with the heat. And that's things like investing into long-term urban planning for heat, raising public awareness, and also investing in sustainable cooling technologies.
And what about Northern Europe? It's not very hot here in London in the UK at the moment, but should we be preparing in this part of the region as well?
We definitely should. If you remember last summer, the summer of 2022, the UK also experienced a prolonged heat wave, and heat really is an issue that affects us globally.
And what is the potential impact of these extreme weather events on public health, and what needs to be done?
So this really varies. Last summer, just in Europe, there were over 60,000 heat-related deaths on the continent. So we definitely need to be preparing for those impacts. But heat-related deaths, those are really just the most severe outcomes. So what we might also see is impacts on people's cognitive abilities, their ability to work, which then obviously would impact our GDP and people's income.
And so which parts of society, which populations are the most at risk from this type of weather?
So the groups that you might expect to see the biggest impacts are the elderly, the very young, and those whose thermoregulatory system is impaired in some way. And that might be people living with chronic diseases, but also people on certain medications. And on top of these physiological vulnerabilities really come a range of social factors. So, for example, people living and experiencing homelessness might also experience a stronger risk.
And so what should governments be doing, and what can we do ourselves to protect ourselves from this extreme heat?
So as an individual during the heat wave, you can stay hydrated and you can supplement the water that you're drinking with nutrients and salts. Apart from that, you can also help your body to cool down. So that can be seeking out the public cooling shelters that are provided. You might consider sleeping in your basement. And as the government has been advising, cease energy-intensive activities or travel, especially during the hottest hours of the day.
And as uncomfortable and dangerous as this type of heat can be for people, do you think it will have a galvanizing effect on populations when they can really feel the effects of climate change and lead to them putting even more pressure on governments to act now?
It might help us as a society better recognize the impacts of climate change. So the increase in the intensity, duration, and frequency of heat waves that we have been seeing, there is evidence that there's links to climate change. But what we need to be really careful about is that we're not reacting to this in a way that only exacerbates climate change. So, for example, our response shouldn't be to equip every single household with an air conditioner, because these are actually responsible for over 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So instead, we need to be thinking about how we can sustainably cool ourselves.
Carolyn Kroger there. In other news, it's 20 years since China and the European Union signed a comprehensive strategic partnership. On the sidelines of a foreign ministers' meeting for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, two of the world's largest trading partners held discussions on deepening those ties. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
A strengthening of communication to enhance trust and a deepening of cooperation to serve the common interests of both sides. That was the conclusion of China's senior diplomat Wang Yi on the relationship between Brussels and Beijing following his meeting with European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. Wang Yi is the director of the Office of Central Commission for Foreign Affairs, and he urged the EU to clarify its position on the strategic partnership for both sides to promote relations. He also stated that there were no fundamental differences between the two trading partners, as China and the EU both support multilateralism with United Nations at its core. China remains the EU's largest trading partner. Last year, bilateral trade exceeded $950 billion. Josep Borrell confirmed that the EU is willing to explore ways to strengthen policy synergy and promote practical cooperation. He also stated that decoupling is unrealistic in the current codependent global economy. Wang Yi responded by stating that China will further open its economy to the world to allow more opportunities for countries to access its huge market and potential. He concluded by stating that both Beijing and Brussels should continue their support for free trade with an open and inclusive approach and avoid any damaging policies like protectionism. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and the EU. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
Still to come here on The World Today. The United Nations says it's still waiting on an answer from Russia as the Black Sea grain deal is set to expire next week.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
This week on Razor, creating the power of the sun here on Earth.
We will have endless energy. Could replace the oil. It will for sure change our life, change the world a lot. We are working on this project. It's like when humans learn how to use fire. This is the second fire of the human in our history.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top story. Europe is bracing for the hottest temperatures ever recorded as a blistering heat wave continues to scorch southern parts of the continent. South Korea's president has promised more military supplies to Ukraine during a visit to Kiev. Yoon Suk-yeol also pledged $150 million in humanitarian aid following talks with his counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. The surprise trip came after Yoon attended a NATO summit in Lithuania and visited Poland this week. A US ally and rising arms exporter, South Korea has faced renewed pressure to provide weapons to Ukraine.
South Korea will continue to provide military supplies that Ukraine needs. Following on from last year's bulletproof vests and helmets, we will support on a larger scale this year.
Russia says it's looking into a ballistic missile from the DPRK that may have crashed in its waters. State media says Moscow's defense ministry has launched an investigation, but so far there's no evidence that the test launch fell in Russia's economic zone. Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva has more from Moscow.
Well, that's right. We have heard from the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko. Quoted as saying that Russia is still looking into whether the intercontinental ballistic missile has actually landed in the Russian waters. We still don't know, he said. The Russian Ministry of Defense has launched an investigation, but no clear site was identified so far. Russia has been saying that while the United States, South Korea and Japan have condemned the move by North Korea to launch this missile, Russia has been saying that that was a response to the hostile policies of the Western countries that are driving North Korea to beef up its defenses. And another statement has been made by Russia's foreign ministry's spokesperson Maria Zakharova, who has said that the United Nations is now capable to say the direction where the missile was going towards, and said that with regard to that, Moscow hopes that the United Nations would also be able to identify the direction of the shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So definitely this is not the first time we keep hearing Moscow accusing the Western countries and the United Nations of some sort of criticism, saying that those countries were unwilling to have a multipolar world, to see the changing narrative globally. And that's why Moscow says the Western countries have been unwilling to meet Russia's demands when it comes to the implementation of the grain deal, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which has two parts, and the second part with regards to the facilitation of the Russian agricultural exports, Moscow says has never been implemented. Let's take a closer look to why Russia says it is not really seeing the ground for further continuation and extension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Black Sea grain deal hasn't had much impact on Russia or its farmers, meaning that this latest news is largely being met with a shrug. One of Moscow's key complaints is that the grain deal had been implemented so unfairly it made no difference to Russian exporters. The Kremlin claims the part of the deal relating to Ukrainian agricultural exports serves only commercial interests, and the part relating to facilitating Russian agricultural exports has seen zero progress.
For Russia, the extension of the deal plays a very small role, especially for the farmers who have not received anything. In my opinion, it will be even better for Russia's image if the deal is not extended. Because in that case, as Putin said, those poor countries in Africa that did not get anything under the grain deal, or no more than 3% from those agricultural products, will instead be supplied with grain from Russia as part of the food aid.
Russian officials have said that contrary to the noble goals of the deal to supply the poorest countries in need, the main beneficiary of the deal was the European Union, while Brussels claims 57% of the grain went to developing countries.
The volume of grain that the poorest countries received, and I repeat this, is a little over 3%. We will be ready to deliver to the poorest countries free of charge.
Moscow also complained about Ukraine's use of the grain deal's sea corridors to launch marine drones. The destruction of the Telyati-Odessa ammonia pipeline was seen as yet more proof that the West was not interested in the deal's extension.
For Russian producers, this deal does not play any role at all. It only harms them in terms of sales markets. It doesn't help Russian producers in any way. It was promised there would be relief for Russian grain exports, but there's no relief. We didn't expect it, but it was clear from the very beginning that none of this would work.
Russian agricultural producers are now expected to continue exporting as they have been exporting after February 24 last year. Those involve problems with insurance and freight that have become unprecedentedly expensive, as well as the lack of access to SWIFT payment system, making transactions far more complicated. Russian exporters say they are now used to those roadblocks, but continue to experience negative consequences.
Despite all these obstacles, the volume of exports is not affected. What is affected is the price of exported goods, because these risks are being included in the selling price. Therefore, our prices are much lower than, for instance, the French produce prices. On average, our discount is between $10 to $20 per ton. That's the money we're losing.
Russian experts also suggest that the talk of a global food crisis is more of a PR campaign. They insist there is no deficit, that the question is more about what the clients can afford to buy. And so they predict this latest decision means the impact to global prices will be limited. Dasha Chernysova, CGTN, Moscow.
Venezuela was once one of the wealthiest oil nations in the world, but despite its vast reserves, the country doesn't even rank among the top 10 of oil producers now. After years of mismanagement, underinvestment and American sanctions, the government is looking to restore its broken oil industry. Our correspondent Mary Trinimina reports.
More than a century ago, oil erupted here in Cabimas. It was the beginning of what would be a prolific era of oil production across the region. Today, that story of success has been left behind. Where hundreds of wells used to operate, there are now just a handful actively drilling. Most oil rigs are shut down, the gray steel girders rusty and abandoned.
The majority of those oil rigs in the lake used to work, all of them, but all started to decline.
William Gutierrez worked at the state oil company PDVSA for 20 years. He's witnessed firsthand how the industry went from one of the largest in the world to an impoverished one. Oil output has plummeted 75% in the last 10 years. From more than 3 million barrels a day down to just about 700,000. In November, the U.S. authorized Chevron, the only remaining American company operating in Venezuela, to start pumping oil again. According to oil experts, it will take time and investment to restore the century-old industry to its former glory.
In order to recover Venezuela's oil industry, I estimate that $25 billion per year are needed. Per year for the next 8 years to get us closer to what we used to produce 20 years ago.
Currently, PDVSA is facing an investigation proof that has led to the arrest of dozens of government officials after years of neglect. As you can see, oil facilities are severely affected. But there's another concern here, the environment. A lack of maintenance on gas and oil pipelines is causing leaks and spills across the Maracaibo Lake. And this oil is making its way to the shore, where it's affecting all living creatures.
For us, oil means destruction. For the fishermen, because our nets are being damaged. The engines are damaged.
One local environmentalist group, Azul Ambientalistas, estimates that between 500 and 1,000 barrels of oil end up in the Maracaibo Lake every single day. Chevron has asked Venezuela to dredge the Maracaibo Lake in order to double its production from 250,000 barrels a day to 400,000. That would boost Venezuela's output to 1 million barrels a day, returning a deteriorated industry to a more prolific past. Mary Trinimena, CGTN, Cabimas, Venezuela.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been hospitalized, but his office says he's in good condition. The 73-year-old is said to be undergoing medical checks after complaining of chest pains. Media reports say he was fully conscious when he was taken into hospital. Netanyahu is the head of the conservative Likud party and the country's longest-serving leader. He's currently in the grip of a domestic furore over his plan to overhaul the Israeli judiciary. Marketa Vondrousova is the new Wimbledon women's champion after stunning the Tunisian competitor Ons Jabeur. Vondrousova is the first unseeded tennis player in the professional era to win the Grand Slam title. She beat Jabeur in 2 straight sets in a testy match where both women fought neck and neck, but Vondrousova proved too steady and polished. The start of the FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand is just 5 days away, and it's shaping up to be one of the highest attended women's sporting events of all time. Greg Navarro has more from Sydney.
Mark, here in Sydney's northern suburbs may not look like it has anything to do with the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, but in just a couple of days, that's about to change. They're going to put in a giant viewing screen in this corner, create some seating as well. That's because this is one of 40 official viewing venues that are being created not only across Sydney, but across the entire state as well to accommodate those fans who really want to see some of the games this year, but have been unable to get tickets. In fact, that demand is driving the sales, get this, of more than 1.2 million tickets so far, both here in Australia as well as New Zealand, where some of those games are being played, making this the most attended Women's World Cup ever. This year's event also includes an expansion of teams to 32, including 4 from Africa, Morocco, African champions South Africa, Nigeria and Zambia playing in its first World Cup. And experts believe the expansion of teams has helped China on its path to qualify. It clinched last year when it beat Vietnam in the quarterfinal of the AFC Asian Cup Championship. Now, China faces a very tough road ahead in Group D, led by European champion England, Haiti and powerhouse Denmark. In fact, Denmark will be China's first opponent. That game, July 22nd, played in Perth. China hoping for a much better outcome than the last time those 2 teams met at the Tokyo Olympics. Denmark winning that one easily by a score of 8-2. Now remember, the top 2 teams in each group will advance to the knockout stages. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
In a moment, my colleague Juliette Mann will be here with The Agenda. In this week's show, the gender gap, why the world needs to work harder to help women get the same opportunities as men. That's The Agenda right after The World Today at 16:30 GMT here on CGTN. And our headlines again. Europe braces for the hottest temperatures ever recorded as a blistering heat wave scorches southern parts of the continent. South Korea's president pledges more military supplies and aid to Ukraine during a visit to Kiev. And China's senior diplomat Wang Yi holds talks with the EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell as Beijing and Brussels look to deepen ties. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or you can scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. And there's more news at the top of the hour. Up next, it's The Agenda with Juliette Mann. But for now, from all the team here in London, it's goodbye.